time, so I've kept my presentation hopefully fairly short, so there's a little bit of time for questions afterwards. So what I'm really going to talk about is just a very brief history and kind of overview of the project, but again I will keep that fairly limited. And then I guess for me some key learnings that I picked up in the project to date, bearing in mind that we are hoping to start building our distillery next month, so I'm not out there actively selling product at the moment, but I have done in the past. So just a few key things about the project. Why did we decide to go for a whiskey distillery at Slane? Well, it matched with our own family story at Slane and the resources that we had on site. And most importantly, if there's one thing you need in the whiskey business, it's patience and time, and it requires a long-term view. And my family has to think in multi-generations in trying to keep a place like Slane going, so there was good alignment there. Our brand story, I guess, and I'll talk more about branding in a second, is really based on our family history. We've been at Slane since 1703, so we have a lot of heritage there. And then my father, Henry, obviously did some very exciting things with the rock and roll world starting in the 80s, and that gave us a new dimension to our history. But that all falls into, I guess, our brand story, and brand story is incredibly important whenever you're getting into this business. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then the resources that we had on site, we've been growing barley on the farm at Slane for hundreds of years. We produce about 2,000 tonnes of barley a year. At the moment I'm selling that into the animal feed business. I'm a price taker, I can't control that price, and I had the opportunity to be able to take that in-house, add value, and turn it into whiskey. And I think from a farming perspective, the most value you can get out of an acre of ground is turning barley into whiskey. The unfortunate thing is you've got to pay to build a distillery in order to extract that value. We've also got the River Boyne flowing through the estate, and that gives us a great supply of water, which is another thing that you need for making whiskey. So we actually launched the brand back in 2009. Some time ago with the Slane Castle brand, and we put that product into the US, Ireland and the UK. We did that using third-party liquid because we didn't have a distillery, we still don't yet, and we were able to get the product up and running with a pretty low level of investment, but what it did require was a lot of personal time investment going out and hand-selling in the markets, a lot of trips to the US to try and build the brand up. We did get a bit of sales traction as a result, working with smaller distributors where we got greater mind share, and that's another important consideration when you're starting out. Things continued to go well, and then in 2012 we actually lost our supply line, and that's really because our supplier was acquired by another entity and they chose not to continue to supply us, which was a big blow at the time, but what it did do, we had always wanted to do a distillery from the outset, so it kind of galvanised us. We had no choice then. The only way to stay in the game was to look at investing in our own production facility on site at Slane, and that's what we started to do. But really, the only way to control your supply, like in any business, is to make the stuff yourself. And that's what we started to look at. So we pulled together a comprehensive design team, and we started investing. The family were funding it entirely ourselves at that stage, which I guess was a risk, but we could see the potential reward and that we had shown that the brand had some traction. We invested a lot of time and money and put together the planning application, and that was granted then in July 2013. We wanted maximum flexibility in our processing facility, so we are combining pot stills and column stills, which will allow us to make pot still whiskey, triple distilled single malt whiskey, and also grain whiskey, which gives you more flexibility in terms of the product portfolio that you want to produce. As I mentioned, we have barley on site, so we're going to be able to use that, and then we have the River Boyne, which thankfully is a large river, which means we're not going to have any problems with extraction limits, etc. Sustainability is very important to me personally in terms of how we approach our design. So we are taking our co-product stream, for example, and we are putting that into a secondary process, an anaerobic digestion plant, which will create methane on site, which we're then able to co-fire with LPG, and that will provide about 25 to 30% of our thermal energy requirement will come from our own waste products, not appropriate to call them waste, but I call them co-products. And then we're building in a lot of energy recovery as well, because not only is it the right thing to do, but it makes good business sense. Energy costs, although they're low at the moment, if you look at the long-term trend, they are going to increase, so that anything that saves energy costs now is going to protect us better in the future. In terms of putting our distillery design together, we did a lot of research on that. But I suppose we've used a number of different suppliers, but all of those suppliers are very experienced and they have a proven track record in the business in either brewing or distilling. Throughout, even though I have not had product to sell since 2012, I have continued to invest in shaping our branding and positioning, and that was very important. Again, I'll get onto this later in terms of attracting investment and potential partners, because it's all about brand. Our partnership, Hunt and Search, was a long and laborious process, and eventually in June this year we signed up a long-term partnership with Brown-Forman, who own the Jack Daniel's brand, would be their best-known brand. And they obviously have great expertise, both technically, they know how to make whiskey, but most importantly they know how to sell whiskey. And we're very happy with that partnership. I guess what's reassuring for us as a family is that they have the Brown family at the heart of that company, which means that they have a very long-term time horizon. They understand it takes time and investment, and the whiskey business, you need time. It will be many years before you really start to return, to get a workable return. So we are now at the stage where our construction tenders have actually been submitted back to us today. So we'll be nominating that contract before the end of this month, and then the builders arrive in October, and we will start building finally our distillery, and it's going to take about 18 months to complete, and then we'll be opening in the summer of 2017 for visitors, because we have a visitor centre as very much part of the project. We hope to commission the stills at the end of 2016. We've got a pretty aggressive build program, but you know, we will do our best to get to that. So that is a very short overview of the project. I didn't want to take up too much time on that. What I did want to share was, I guess, a few key learnings that I've had along the way. That's just a visual. It's done in the stable yards, which are right next to the castle. You've got a two-storey yard and a single-storey yard, and then we've had to build some new buildings as well. This is an architectural conservation area. We're next to a special area of conservation, so we had to invest a lot in the planning application and our approach to design to make sure that it was sensitive. But I'm not going to delve into that, because I'd like to share my key learnings so far. And just bear in mind, as I said, that we don't actively have product to sell at the moment, but we have done in the past. So I guess my first one is that time is never wasted in reconnaissance. And for me, throughout the project, reading, researching and visiting distilleries, getting out and looking at retailers, getting into the bars to see the product, and then just keep doing that. You've got to keep yourself aware of what is happening, and the best way to do that is to get out into the industry itself, pick up bottles, look at distilleries, what are people doing, and continually feed back and reassess your own branding and positioning. For Irish whiskey, and I'm aware obviously there's a lot of brewing here, but there are great resources available. We have the Irish Whiskey Association. We were talking about the need for that in brewing, and I'm sure, you know, there should be a craft brewers association the same way as an Irish whiskey one. The likes of Ball Beer are hugely useful, but these official organisations, they're talking to everyone. They have a lot of information available, and it's worth going and talking to them. So I'm a member of the Irish Whiskey Association, and that organisation joining up with those official bodies is very important, because it keeps you informed, it keeps you connected to the other participants in the industry, and it allows you to make sure that you play by the rules, So we have the Irish Whiskey Technical File, and adhering to that is very important. And it allows you, ultimately, it's your industry, and if you want to shape how that policy is going to play out over time, you need to get involved with the official organisations. And I found this to be very important. Don't be afraid to ask competitors. They are surprisingly helpful. In our project, we've had a lot of support from other players in the industry, the likes of Irish distillers and all the rest. I've been around a lot of their distilleries. Everybody knows what we're up to. But it is a rising tide, and people are willing to help. So don't be afraid to ask what you perceive to be your potential competitors for help and advice. You'd be surprised how willing they are to give it. The next one, it's all about the brand. That's a branding I'm, realise. The one thing that we have done from the outset is we have always reassessed our brand. And a distillery is important for us. It allows us to control our supply chain, but it is really ultimately a means to an end. So it is where you make it, but it's only a part of how you sell it. And investing in and shaping your brand is and I must stress this, it is the most important way to attract partners, investment, and obviously consumers. So if you choose to invest in anything, it must be led by the brand, because that's the only way you're going to get people excited about your project, and you need to keep reassessing that. Don't do it and then feel that it's done. Keep going back to it, keep it fresh. And that really is how we were able to attract Brown-Forman, is by delving into that in a lot of detail. That's ultimately our brand story, is how we got them on board. And for me, a strong brand is one that has a strong story. Whiskey and craft drinks is ultimately about telling stories. That's how your consumers engage about your products when they're on the bar stools in the bar. They're telling stories, and good brands are about stories. And in my own experience, I believe that generally the best stories are generally true. Authenticity is critical, particularly in relation to craft, and then tend to involve people and place. And make that your focus when you're looking at the brand would be my advice. And when telling any story, you need to know your audience, so define and respect your consumers' needs. Because you can get into your consumer's mind, that's going to reflect better on how you pitch your product. Next one is more about designing a plant, but when designing a plant, ask suppliers for advice. And consultants, and I know we have some consultants here, they do have an important role to play in shaping distillery design, but just be cautious about depending on them too much. And in my experience, talk to the suppliers. So experienced suppliers with a proven track record, they do know what they're doing, and they have a lot of knowledge to share with you. So ask them the questions, and you will get a lot of information effectively for free. That means you will end up with a better design overall. And if you want to know how to find those suppliers, we'll go around some distilleries or ask your competitors and look at who's making the equipment in these different places, contact those companies and get the knowledge from them. And for sanity check, which is always important, if you can speak to plant operators in distilleries or breweries that are running the equipment, get their view as well, because the supplier will obviously want to present their best case, but until you talk to the guys who are actually operating the thing, that's when you get the real knowledge as well. So always sanity check it by talking to the operators. And crucially, invest in a good process engineer to stitch the whole thing together. If you've got a number of different suppliers, someone's doing your mash tuns, someone else is doing your brewing tanks, you must have a good process engineer who can put everything together. And then when you do get into the build, and this is the phase that we're going into now, make sure you get a good project engineer to help supervise the build, control the costs, manage expectations and timelines, etc. And this one, get your shoes resoled. Now this is more on what I've done in the past, but it is going to become what I am going to have to do when we have product up and running again. Building any drinks brand, especially a craft one, is going out on the road to sell it, and I cannot stress how important that is. Bottles do not walk off the shelves. You have to hand sell to firstly your distributors, but also to your consumers. And it is cheaper than most advertising, but just be aware that it takes up the one thing that you can't buy, and that's time. But it is time that is well invested. And I suppose you have to enjoy it, And it's important to remember that you're not going to mind telling your brand story if you really believe in it. And that brings me back to the brand, always questioning, do you believe in your brand? If you do, other people will too. And lastly, I guess it's the best way to learn how to improve your products and your branding by listening to the consumers. You know, you can pay a lot for market research, but if you can go out there, sell your product at the same time, you're also getting research at the same time, so it's hugely useful. So yeah, I'm going to be wearing out a lot of shoes over the next few years, but it's thankfully part of the job that I enjoy. And that is it. So I just wanted to share those with you. That note that I put up there, I've had lots of problems over this project, but the way I always see it is that it is a disguised opportunity. So we had a partner, we lost a partner, that allowed us to go and look for another one. We ran into problems with the distillery design, but then that allowed us to re-engineer things. So whenever you do hit problems, there's always an upside.
Brilliant. Maybe 2 seconds for a couple of quick questions before Stuart comes on. Stuart, we'll invite you up so we can set you up, if that's okay. Anybody got a quick question for Alex? Amazing presentation there, very detailed, you know, fantastic journey, fantastic story. Go for it.
Are you planning junior vodka?
Very good question. We did initially. We have now decided that we are going to make whiskey our focus. And my one comment I would make there, which was pointed out to me by someone it wasn't Brown-Forman, it was another major player, was to build any brand takes a significant investment. So if you're looking at doing a gin and a whiskey, you've then got to double up that investment effectively. And also consumers tend to recognise you as being a maker of something in particular. The craft spirits has changed that a little bit, but I would just be wary of diversifying. It does address a short-term need. If you can't get whiskey, you need to get something up and running sooner. Just bear in mind that any brand requires a lot of investment, and most of all, personal investment in terms of time. Splitting yourself between two, that can be a problem.
He's coming if you see him.
Very good.
To make sure
Anybody else?
some good footage of these rooms.
There's going to be time for questions later on in the day.
So this room, the one down the very end.
We expect to have a product on, I would say it is going to be spring 2017,
So many images it is.
but that will not be product
carrying
from
the
our
camera
own
if I see
distillery,
it,
we're being totally open about that.
Okay.
It's product
So
that was sourced from elsewhere, but we are improving and amending that by looking at finishing in a number of different
So
colors.
you have your own bank and your own product in the future?
Yes, so 2020, 2021 is when our own product will start coming out from our own distillery.